Hello and welcome to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kaushji. Niaga Spotlight takes us through the week in economic analysis and future affairs. Now this week on analysis, we spotlight the upcoming SST expansion and Malaysia's digital future. So of course, Malaysia's July 1st SST expansion, it requires unpacking, going beyond tax headlines to explore its real impact on the digital economy, SMEs, as well as middle-income consumers. Now, while the revenue goal of 5 billion ringgit per year via SST 2.0 to support fiscal reform under Economy Madani is a tantalizing imperative, it requires inclusive and forward-looking participation from the digital economy in particular. Now, this is to ensure that current challenges including e-wallets, streaming, fintech raising fees, SMEs facing compliance burdens which risk slowing digitization and potential price hikes across tech services due to tax cascading in B2B chains are all managed adequately. It is also equally important to understand how e-invoicing could quietly fast-track digitalization, why fintech and digital platforms might see user drop-off, and whether the SST expansion risks widening the digital divide for underserved B40 Malaysians. Now, this is a timely analysis at how tax reform intersects with Malaysia's digital ambitions under Economy Madani. I have the absolute pleasure of welcoming to the studios with me today, live, Chris Daniel Wong, who is Emeritus Chair. Dr. Chris is with the Malaysia Digital Chamber of Commerce, or the MDCC. Chris, very good morning. Thank you so much for making time. How are you today?
Good, very well. Thank you for inviting.
Exactly. So I think it's a really timely proposition that you're coming in to help us voice out what some of the concerns as well as the exciting things which the digital economy players are looking forward to. Chris, let's start off with looking at the fact that Malaysia's digital economy is growing at a really healthy rate, right? We're seeing figures and facts of about 23.5% of GDP coming in to about in excess of close to 430 billion ringgit, and this was in 2023. It's projected to hit closer to 26% of GDP, and this is by 2025, this year. So tell us a little bit about how the SST expansion will be impacting this momentum and things to watch out for.
Well, if you look at the expansion of the entire digital economy, it touches on many sectors. I think first we look at e-commerce, which is a major driver of the retail economy. Then we have cloud services, which not only the retail market uses, but also the enterprise market. The enterprise markets has three segments in fact. You have the government, who uses cloud services, and then you have the MNC, or mid-tier company, and also the SME, and then you have a lot of retail that use digital content. Digital content probably in various social media platforms. And people who advertise on social media, right? So these are the main contributor of revenue to the what we call that digital market. But when the government of the day implement SST at 8% across the board, what will happen then is that you will see that prices will be driven up. So when prices driven up, you are given an amount of budget, and you cannot exceed that budget, and that budget needs to include government SST as well, which will mean the consumption of the services would then be lesser. It's the same amount of money, all right? But however, the consumption will be lesser because part of the money would then be allocated towards paying SST. So therefore, when the consumption becomes smaller, right, it will affect the quality and the productivity of the company. That's where I see that.
Absolutely, and I think you've made a great point over there, because generally digital SMEs, they quite often rely on outsourced B2B services for IT and etc., and that's how the cascading costs can actually be hitting them. So tell me about how critical MDCC views the maintenance of this investment momentum. We had close to 163 billion ringgit approved as of last year, and how is this also going to help to buffer some of the anticipated impacts, at least during the adjustment period, Chris?
Well, if you look at that, if you see year to year, definitely investment will come in. It's just a matter of how much and how little will come in. But there will be impact. Just give an example, and all this is about sustainable policy, forward-looking policy, and very important, policy that is constant. When I say constant policy, you don't change it very often. You probably look at it 2 years or 3 years once. Right. You revamp policy as when time changes. But when tax has been reformed year after year, it will affect the sustainability of the policy. So one very good example, I think in Niaga, AWANI, I was asked the same question as well. Right. When we look at data center, there are influx of data center right now in what we call that in Johor. All right. When you rent out the server, when you rent out the space, definitely there will be SST. All right. And especially if your what we call that your $500,000 income threshold has already crosses the mark. And that is one part of it. And then we are talking about manpower. When people rent your data server farm, there will be manpower involved as well. Naturally. And that is SST billable, all right? So there's many components of SST, and you will see the cascading effect where the cost of doing business just by data farm center would that increases. So that's what worries us as a chamber, all right? Because we will no longer be sexy, all right? As compared to Singapore, obviously, you look at exchange rate, we still may be comparable cheaper, but we must also understand that Singapore has better provided infrastructure at the present moment versus us, all right? Whether in KL or in Johor, where we are still building that infrastructure. So that's what worries us in the chamber.
So what I'm also hearing is the fact that the investment momentum, which has been achieved by 2024, that's actually going to be able to form a little bit of a buffer for us right now, right? Moving on into the next few years. So perhaps maybe even digital infrastructure or even SME grants could be used from the already made investments to perhaps offset a few of these expenses. But moving on from there, Chris, let's talk about fintech platforms. E-wallets, for example, which are hugely popular amongst everyday Malaysians and users, they are also definitely going to be passing on SST costs to users. So are we now then looking at the potential of a digital divide when it comes to lower income Malaysians, and will they then be delaying their own fintech adoption?
That is a very straightforward answer, and says yes. You will see digital divide between the urban, semi-urban, and the less urban. Right.
Three segments then, the way you see it. Okay.
Right. You see Kuala Lumpur is a first world city. But however, if you go to Seremban, that will be a semi-urban area. Right? And then obviously you go to Kampung, it's lesser than that. But we are blessed because across the board, we have good coverage. Certain places that you don't have 5G, you still have 4G. But across the board, we have 5G, right? But that is only on data coverage. So what you mentioned just now is very apt. Fintech right now, at the chamber level, we work very closely with Pemuda and the Malaysia Productivity Corporations. We have come up with the first, what we call that, alternative dispute resolution for B2B online businesses. Right. So recently, there are complaints came in that platform provider, I can't name them, but there are e-commerce platform providers that start to charge 8% on commission, right? So they are taking commission. There's nothing wrong. They are taking commission from their sellers, online sellers, all right? But the commission that they charge is now 8%. Right. Government mandated that you have to charge 8% on the commission that you charge on the seller. So again, like what I mentioned earlier on, the margin becomes thinner. And then when the margin becomes thinner, people need to survive. And what they do, they have no choice but to increase the selling prices, right? The prices of goods. And it would then be passed on to that consumer. Naturally. Naturally. Yeah. So that is only the final tax that we see. But in between the middle tax, for example, the reseller would have imported the goods from overseas, or the resellers will have gotten the goods, bought or purchased the good from a local manufacturers. Right. There are raw materials that have been taxed as well. And there will be logistic tax as well. So you see raw materials being taxed, logistics being taxed. So it's a cascading tax, which then end consumer, I'm just briefly sharing that there are three taxes here, three cascading tax. So 8 times, 3 times times 8, 3 times times 8, 3 multiple times, multiplied by 8, that will be 24%.
That's right.
So across the board, you will see that prices will definitely increase all right, between at the range of 15 to 21%. So that's what worries us. So what will happen then is people will then buy lesser.
And so
then,
perhaps could we look at maybe SST relief or subsidies kind of forming the bridge for this anticipated inevitability as we're describing it?
If you look at businesses subsidies, it comes in many various forms. It comes in tax relief, it comes in a form of grant. But what we believe is that if you look at the mathematics, you do the math, all right? The subsidies or the grant would not be able to offset the market purchases.
Right.
Because if you look at digital economy, it's about 25%. Right?
Total GDP, yes.
Total GDP. And what's our GDP right now? Almost $1 trillion, right? So we are talking about 250 million at least. So do we have that kind of money, or does the government have that kind of money, 250 million, to offset, to give it in the form of subsidies or grant to offset the inflation that's coming up? So we got to look at the math. So for me, professionally, if you look at the point of as an economist, there must be certain items that is not taxable because it has already been a cascading effect.
That's right. For example, the same way in which certain exceptions have already been announced for food items, the same actually most likely needs to be done for digital products too.
Yeah, I believe, in my opinion, basic digital product that should not be taxed is probably earphone, right? Handphones. Those are basic needs. It's just like apple and orange become a staple food. Handphone become a basic needs of us. So what we would like to implore the government is that to look at the basic digital needs of the consumer. For example, data. Your house probably have Wi-Fi, right, or internet, and it shouldn't be taxed because it's basic needs. So not only staple food, but staple digital consumption shouldn't be taxed as well.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense when it comes to how it might be rolling out. Would you have some perhaps quick advice from MDCC's perspective for companies and how they can then navigate the double taxation on their own digital service chains?
Well, that's a very tough question to answer, in fact. If you look at companies, a lot of process involved in delivering the end product. Right? If you look at, for example, you walk into restaurants, they use tablet to do ordering nowadays.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Right? So
no matter where you go.
That is part of the digital process as well. Well, the raw materials has already been taxed, and then the end product is also being taxed. Now, sugar has been taxed as well because it's a processed product, all right? So I think what SMEs especially can do is to make their process leaner. And when you make the process leaner, you can actually reduce costs. But again, it's easy said to be done. And many of the companies, you know, Malaysia is a very unique country because of our three main races. And our three main races here is what I always say with my circle of friends, we are shock resilience people. We are really shock resilience people, primarily because we are export-driven market. So when there are, let's say, tariff increases from any other countries, we will be able to absorb that in a very
unique manner.
I mean, unique and short time frame manner. So sometimes they will come and tell us, and say, how much can we be leaner? Because there's only so much you can do, right? Of course, the answer is to go lean, right? To manage the cost, look at product that is focused on products that is sellable, remove products that from the shelf that is not sellable, all right? That doesn't have that demand, all right? But end of the day, again, very important is that these businesses try not to raise prices as much as it should be, actually, because you still need the consumer to come back.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Chris, for the discussion so far. Don't go anywhere. We'll come right back after the short break discussing SST, expansion and impacts on the digital economy. Welcome back to Niaga Spotlight, still with me, Tamina Kausji. And today, of course, we are covering and getting back into the conversation on SST expansion and impacts on Malaysia's digital futures and economy with Dr. Chris Daniel Wong. So Chris, moving back into the conversation, another big area of discussion is the fact that e-invoicing is also becoming mandatory by mid this year, which is right about now. So is this then perhaps a hidden catalyst for digital tax compliance, or is it also going to become a compliance hurdle for our numerous small players?
Well, I look at it, the gap is big. It will be a compliance hurdle for many SMEs, right? Especially the smaller businesses. The smaller businesses, probably revenue is about 600,000, 700,000. Definitely they have, what we call that, reach the minimum $500,000 threshold.
Yeah.
And the challenges is that most of these companies, because the margin is so thin, they don't really have cloud-based technologies.
Right.
They don't use it. And because when they don't have cloud-based, very rarely they use API integration. They don't have that capability to integrate the payment system into an API or maybe a particular module into API. When we look at the e-invoicing system, all right, some of it has been incorporated into CRM system as well, into ERP system as well. Those are quite big SME that can actually afford to do it. Affordability doesn't only mean money, it also means manpower.
Very true.
You need to have compliance officer or maybe operational
qualified
staff
inside your system already.
You have an operation executive who actually really look into that. So the other factor is actually compliance, compliance needs and compliance costs. So the gap is still there. The gap is really still there. If you look at statistics, we got about 1.21 million registered businesses with SSM, and more than 95% is actually SME. And of the 95%, about 60% to 70% is actually micro SME. So which means the gap is really huge if you look at the statistics.
Exactly. So I mean, the stats as well coming out from SME Core, they're also showing that not even 20% have actually even begun with the implementation for e-invoicing. So it's definitely pointing towards quite a few complex issues. But at the same time, maybe if we were to look at for e-invoicing to do phasing, how would that perhaps aid? Or is it just something which is going to continue to be an issue regardless of the time frame given? Chris?
Now, one thing that we are very happy with at the Chamber is that the e-invoicing was supposed to be 150,000 below
That's
threshold. Right. And then we fought for it. We fought for the policy, and then now it became $500,000. We thank the government of the day for it. But next,
very cognizant, yes.
But next, aptly what you say, next one, it will be, we need a phased implementation, especially for the micro SME, so they can ease the transition. Like what I mentioned just now, 60–70% of the micro SME, they are not ready. So what are they going to do? Either they close shop, or they do lesser so that they don't go above the $500,000 threshold. So there's many probability that will really happen actually. And government should actually take the lead and initiative through various agencies, for example, SME Corp, to provide solutions, affordable solutions to the micro SMEs and more training. And these SMEs, micro SMEs, they don't have time to come for physical classes.
Naturally.
You probably have to do videos, 2 minutes videos, 3 minutes video that's
standardized
not very long,
explainers,
and explain how to use that system actually, right? So and then probably at every daerah, at every district level, there will probably need to be an SME champion coach that actually hold the micro SMEs. Hey, have you done this?
Organization by organization.
What's the challenges? So there's continuous, not only workshop, but hand-holding process so that we can see a total, not seamless, but a total buy-in of adopting e-invoicing.
A soft mandate might actually turn out to be a blessing in disguise. But moving on from there, I'd also like MDCC's expertise looking at a wider area of discussion, Chris. Now, Malaysia's also secured close to 90 billion ringgit in data center investments in 2024, as we were touching on earlier. So with SST on leasing and energy costs, what could the slowdown or potential slowdown mean, and how can we move from there, anticipating this already?
Now, from what from the news report that I read yesterday, it seems that there is a changes. There are changes. What happened is that government will not tax on leasing. That's good news. And also, government will not tax on well, I can't recall that, but mainly it's on leasing. So there's a good news for data center actually. But again, if the data center is above 500,000 revenue, definitely the tax will be there. All right. So what we look at that to reshape the digital infrastructure landscape, we need to create more jobs from data centers.
Right.
Right. What we heard from ground up feedback is that most of the data center leases, all right, does not create much jobs. But it consumes a lot of energy, like what you mentioned just now, and it consumes a lot of water. So we are only seeing the top of the food chain, that benefited from these data center businesses.
That's right. The first layer only, so to speak.
Companies that provide electricity, companies that provide what we call that data center leases, they benefited. But the middle part, the jobs for the middle part, for example, data scientists, for example, even the basic reception jobs, they aren't much actually, because data center is supposed to run by itself. Right? You just store the data on the cloud, and then the data would, the server would then pull the data from cloud and so forth. So it's a server farm essentially. So you don't
exactly
really need,
and to be most modern, you have to adopt that system.
So you don't really need much manpower to do it. But in the long term, we need to create jobs, right, from these kind of businesses. So when you create jobs, definitely there will be expansion of tax collection, whether in the form of business tax, whether in the form of SST tax, or whether in the form of income tax.
Exactly. So from there also, let's go into the fact that 70% of SMEs did report healthy growth, and this was in 2024, but also thanks to AI adoption, which increased from 11% to close to 30%. So that's super encouraging. Does MDCC feel that SST on digital services will discourage further AI and cloud investment, or do you hope to see those numbers grow again?
Well, definitely in the short term, there will be knee-jerk reaction. All right, with the implementation, people will hold back on investment. They will actually look at what we call that see and wait, look approach. All right, but we need during this time, the policymaker need to look at policy support. Right, and three very important policy support is that they need to look at tax rebates or maybe capital allowances for businesses that invest into AI or digital, tax rebates or maybe capital allowances, right? And then the second is consider SST exemption for productivity enhancing technology, right? Like for example, I mentioned there are tools that we use every day for our businesses, especially digital. So consider that for exemption, because it when you spend more on these gadgets, it will produce better productivity. And it should be exempted, because once productivity improves, revenue improves. When revenues improve, collection of corporate tax also improves. Right? And the third one is that we need to promote more local digital tools. Right? Right now, most of the solution is coming from foreign companies. So we need to have more, not only startups, but we need to have more mid-tier companies. Why mid-tier companies? Because they already have that finances. They have that money. All right. Probably what they don't have is the know-how. They can probably partner with certain local startup companies or smaller companies, provide the finances, the capital, and then these companies, being lean company, being a startup, being more innovative, can actually come up with more digital tools locally.
Exactly. We also need to be innovators rather than just consumers. Chris, before we end off, I want to give you space for a last discussion area. So, of course, with the anticipated 5 billion ringgit a year coming in from SST revenue, which has been pledged by Economy Madani fiscal buffers, what are MDCC's expectations around how this will directly feed into, hopefully, the digital infrastructure, literacy, and also, of course, SME support and growth?
Well, I look at it three areas. What I mentioned just now was actually digital job creation. Yep. We need more digital job creations, right? And the second is actually utilization of funding into much more appropriate area, like what I mentioned earlier on. Have policies and incentive for mid-tier companies to invest their retained profits into innovative startups or smaller companies so that you can produce more local digital tools that will create jobs again. And then the last one is that obviously we look at digital divide, huge between non-urban and urban.
That's right.
And we got to do more actually. We got to do more, and you need policies and especially tax rebate for the bigger company to actually bring all this, what we call it, technology into rural area, right? For example, there will be people who still do rural farming, for example, or maybe rural industries, and it has to come along with technology, like agriculture technology, plantation technologies.
Digitizing one part of the...
Yes, correct. And therefore, you can elevate the status of the local economy in this non-urban area.
Absolutely. Chris, thank you so much for actually setting the tone for what needs to be done for the digital economy. Pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you.
Well, Malaysia's SST expansion isn't just about tax, it's a pivotal moment for the digital economy. Now, of course, as MDCC's Dr. Chris Daniel Wong has just shared, the impact on SMEs, fintech and consumers is real, but so is the opportunity to drive smarter, inclusive digitalization under Economy Madani. The key? Balance reform with readiness. Well, that's all we have time for today on Niaga Spotlight. We'll see you again next week with more economic analysis and insights. I'm Tamina Kausji signing off. Here's to a productive week ahead.